Hello. Ah, there it is. Good evening, everybody. My name is J.K. Fowler. I'm the executive director of the Bay Area Book Festival. Thank you so much for spending your Saturday night with us. I'm really excited for the conversation tonight. We have a number of staff and volunteers that are here in the room with us tonight. And as you all know, if you've ever put on an event, it takes a whole village to do something like this. If you are staff or a volunteer, can you just raise your hand so folks can... I also want to give a shout out to Oakstop. It's a community partner of ours. Trevor and team, thank you so much for letting us use your space tonight. Julie with Penguin Random House, who works closely with Greil, has been an amazing support throughout this process and has gotten us some great press, so thank you. So we have a number of off-festival events that we do. We have about 16 that we're doing this year, and of course our main thing is the Bay Area Book Festival. How many here know about the Bay Area Book Festival? Okay, quite a few. That's great. Well, this year we're nearly back to pre-COVID numbers, which is really exciting. We have 350 authors over 21 stages. It's 3 days. Let me say that again. May 29th to May 31st. We're opening the evening with an amazing conversation between Nanette Okafor and Marshall Gans. That's going to be at the Freight. And it is just a ton of programming, 122 programs to choose from. Tons for youth if you have kids or kiddos in your life. We're going to have activations throughout Saturday and Sunday. We're going to be in Civic Center Park. We're going to be up and down Alston Way with 150 exhibitors and on and on and on. So I'll stop talking about it. But it's all on our website if you go visit our website. Coming up this next week, we have Namali Serpel in conversation with Kathy Park Hong. And that's also happening at an Oakstop location just down the way at 2323 Broadway. So we're very excited about that conversation. And we also have a Merit Dialogue, which is an ongoing speaker series that we're trying to launch. The next one is going to be on May 5th. That's at the New Parkway Theater. We have 2 virtual speakers. We have Jeff Chang, who's our longtime moderator for the series. And we have an artist that sort of opens the event. So it's a very special evening. You get your beer, you get your popcorn, your pizza, whatever you want. Sit and have a great conversation, and we close it out with a community conversation talking about the topic that was just discussed. So May 5th is on Iran. All right. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Dora, who's hiding here behind the sign. She's our Deputy Director of Programs. And enjoy the conversation.
Hey everybody, so I'm Dora LaFlora. I'm Deputy Director of Programs at the Bay Area Book Festival, which means I get to read a lot of books and I get to spend wonderful evenings with you guys. Thank you guys so much for spending your Saturday with us. So one of the things I love most about curating for this festival and our events in general is that I get to pair people whose works may live in different worlds, but whose passion intersects in their shared love for art, storytelling, and building a more imaginative and positive future. Tonight embodies that spirit perfectly. We are marking the 50th anniversary of Mystery Train, Greil Marcus's groundbreaking book that changed how we understand American music, culture, and myth. And to explore its lasting pulse, we've honored to have Greil joined by David Diggs, an artist whose own work breaks boundaries from Hamilton to clipping to blind spotting. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Greil Marcus and David Diggs.
All right, slide it to the right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out. This is thrilling. I was telling Greil backstage, I was so honored and excited when I got asked to do this with you. in my hometown. I came in contact with Mystery Train for the first time in college, but I was much dumber then, and I had very little memory of it, but I also, have known you since I was, for most of my life. We've known each other since I was 8 years old, I think, probably. And so it was a thrilling opportunity, and then I started to reread the book, and I was just, it's one of the more beautiful things I've ever read. So I've had such a wonderful time rereading it and getting to sit and reread it with the music playing and take my time and have fun with it. It's such a joyful experience. So thank you for inviting me to come talk about it with you.
Well, it's a great honor to work with David. Just a couple of days ago, I watched his great movie, Blind Spotting, again. I just can't imagine a bigger movie about Oakland, about the Bay Area, about friends, about danger. It just has, it's as if Oakland were the world. Such a thrilling movie, and so much more. I remember going to Hamilton in New York and thinking, this sounds kind of contrived, And I just don't know how this is going to work. And then there is David playing Thomas Jefferson and Lafayette, and everything fell into place. What a thrilling role that was.
It was. I'm glad it worked out for you, man. Clearly it worked out for me too, but I as well thought it was a terrible idea. I thought my friend was a lunatic for writing that thing, but thank you.
I had this idea after seeing Blind Spotting for the first time. I wrote David, and I said, this movie there's just so much there, and you have such presence. You really ought to run for president. And I said, I can see the commercial now. It's, hi, I'm David Diggs. I'm not Jefferson, but I played him in Hamilton. And I want to tell you.
Nobody wants that job, That's how we end up with the fucker who has it now. It's a real shitty job.
Well, I wrote this book that we're here to talk about, Mystery Train. I wrote it in Berkeley 51 years ago, 52, 53 years ago. And, it means so much to me that the book festival wanted me to come here and talk about it. I got so much help from Dora. People have been so welcoming and just so enthusiastic, and I feel really privileged to be here. So I want to start by reading the introduction to this new edition, and then we'll take off, see what happens. When I took the title of Elvis Presley's last single for Sun Records as the title for this book, I had no argument to make for it. The words had an echo in them. That was all I knew. 50 years later, I know a few things more. It's been a good train to hitch a ride on. The echo has never ceased to sound. Over time, the image of the song has surfaced again and again as a kind of talisman, maybe of the need or the wish for mystery itself, as a dimension of life too often missing. I first noticed that this train was still running in 1986 with Thurston Moore's slow chant, "Mystery Train, three-way plane," in Sonic Youth's Expressway to Your Skull. The sound was blowing up in a tiny nightclub, but those first two words were as clear as a fire alarm. That same year, I came across Lynn Turner's Harlequin intrigue novel, Mystery Train, discarded on a beach, and the jacket pictured a clean-cut young woman who seemed about to pitch off the back of a caboose. In the lower right-hand corner was a smaller picture of a dead woman face down in a creek. And cut in under the first woman's wind-blown hair was an insert promising special offer, win a great prize, see inside, no purchase necessary. And the prize was detailed on the inside cover, lots of money. In 1989, there was Jim Jarmusch's film Mystery Train, 3 stories about 3 foreign visitors holed up in the same Elvis-haunted Memphis hotel on the same night, with the desk manned by Screamin' Jay Hawkins, but with the train that brings 2 Japanese rockabilly fans into town taking a turn that wasn't in the script. In the middle of the night, an Italian woman is awakened by a befuddled Elvis ghost, and she asks what he's doing in her room. "I don't rightly know, ma'am," he says, and then he vanishes. The actor was Stephen Jones, perhaps the least convincing Elvis impersonator in the history of Western civilization. Though a few years later, Jones got his hands on American history, the real thing, when his wife, Paula Jones, filed a sexual harassment suit against another sometime Elvis impersonator, a better one, especially in 1992 when he became President of the United States. There's no reason to think that Jarmusch ever saw The Mystery Train, a 1931 swindle on a train movie starring Hedda Hopper, when she was still a contract player and hadn't moved up to Queen of Hollywood as a red-hunting gossip columnist, which effectively, and the movie was with effectively dank, nearly black opening scene of a speeding passenger train barreling through the night, unleashed until it derails in a hail of chaos and fright. There's no reason to think that Sam Phillips ever saw that movie, but he could have in a third-run movie house in Memphis before he was 10, with the title, a phrase that once Elvis had made it that somehow lodged in the back of his mind. Mystery Train, a phrase that once Elvis had made it a metaphor for fate and desire, became a signpost, a doorway to a better world, a key to the truth, a philosopher's stone. Even in the 50s, the Virginia rockabilly singer Janice, the female Elvis Martin, was asking the other Elvis for a ride on his mystery train. In her hands, an image Elvis would not likely have associated with schedules and conductors. In 1969, in The Doors' Rock is Dead, a miserable studio jam not released until 30 years later, Jim Morrison found his one moment of lucidity when he stumbled onto The Long Black Train. From Jerry Lee Lewis hammering out the song on an electric guitar that same year, to over the next decade, from the band to the Soft Boys to UFO to the Blake Babies to Ashtray to the Waco Brothers, from Robert Zimmerman in Hibbing, Minnesota in 1958 with his high school band, the Golden Chords, and their Mystery Train rewrite, Big Black Train, to Bob Dylan in 2020 in Murder Most Foul, calling out to Wolfman Jack running his DJ's turntables in heaven to play Mystery Train for Mr. Mystery, along with Stella by Starlight for Lady Macbeth, as band after band and singer after singer have found themselves scavenging pieces of the tune, ringing small changes on the song straight into the next century, with Bruce Springsteen marking off a radio nowhere determined to give up no such thing, but still searching for the Mystery Train. In 2017, it takes a worried man to sing a worried song. The Carter family sang in the Victor Studios one Saturday evening, May 24th, 1930. The late Charles K. Wolfe wrote in the notes to the 1995 Carter family reissue, Worried Man Blues, speaking of the earliest recording of the folk ballad that Sam Phillips and the blues singer Junior Parker would rewrite as Mystery Train in 1953, even though in the song itself, in Worried Man Blues, the words never appear. The record wouldn't be released until November of that fall. Wolfe wrote of Worried Man Blues in 1930. It would be one of their last really big hits for some time. And by then, more than a few listeners were nodding their heads in sad appreciation of the lyrics. Out in the Midwest, more than 1 million farm families were being devastated by the drought. Herbert Hoover was admitting that more than 4 million other Americans were now unemployed, but denying that the government should offer any aid to them. Across the South, as furniture store owners wheeled their Victrolas out on the sidewalks to play the new Carter family record, families with grim faces and patched clothes gathered and listened. Who was referring to what? When in 2018, the New York Times ran a piece on palace intrigue in North Korea, headlined, "Bulletproof, Slow, and Full of Wine, Kim Jong-un's Mystery Train." But surely it was meant to drape an aura over the fireplug dictator, and surely it succeeded. Where was the train going? Did it ever arrive? Was there any wine left? I wrote this book to argue that rock and roll, as it first emerged as a mysterious new sound from 1948 to 1954 in Baltimore and New York and New Orleans, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Memphis, that rock and roll could not be separated from American history, and that both the history and the music would come out richer, speaking more clearly, with more flair and imagination, purpose and memory, idealism and honesty, if that were recognized as a natural fact. And my bet was that people already knew this. They just hadn't put it into words. But looking at the book now, over 50 years of following where the stories first told here in 1975 have gone over the half century. As those tales took new forms in different music, in chronicles and books, in poems and movies, novels and deaths, in fame and obscurity, remembering and forgetting, and thinking about how, if you include the characters appearing on a 1970s talk show in the first pages of this book as principals in the story that I attempted to make, and I do take them as principals, then of all the figures addressed here, as I write, and this was true a year ago when I wrote this, and it's true today, only Dick Cavett, Rita Moreno, and Randy Newman remain. When I realized that, I realized that the book was about something else. It wasn't just about getting people to see rock and roll as American culture and find American culture in rock and roll. This book was written during the Watergate crisis. I finished it the day Richard Nixon resigned the presidency in 1974. The notes and discographies section following the main text, a section that's now far longer than the text, was revised for perhaps the last of many times in the midst of and after the presidential election of 2024. In both of those times, the question of what America was, what it wanted to be, what it had promised itself it would be, how it never ceased to fail those promises or to struggle to realize them, to find out what they really were, as the right to vote, the right to declare for yourself who you were and how you wanted to be recognized, the right to deserve and to receive the respect of your fellow citizens as you offered respect to them. Those questions were inescapable in 1974 and 2024. In those years, this was the stuff of everyday conversation. It was what kept people up at night. It was terrifying before it was anything else. And as I write, that is true, and it will be true tomorrow. In a year or two, it may not be terrifying, but terror. See my shirt? People live that out. They're doing it today. And in both of these times, far more came to the surface as talk and dream, victory and defeat, as a confrontation with the life and death of the Republic. The desire to think it all through, to find out what it was that most needed to be said, and to find the words to say it. That's what was driving me then, and it was driving me a year ago. I realized more than I ever did before that this book was an attempt to do that, to face those questions, and that before and after everything else, after the last note of Robbie Robertson's guitar solo at the close of King Harvest Has Surely Come, or the smile at the end of Robert Johnson's Hellhound on My Trail, this is a book about American democracy, and it was always meant to be a piece of it.
It's unbelievable, man. You write. Have you always worn glasses? Yes. What's?
No. Until I was 7 years old, I didn't wear glasses, and then I got glasses, and I made an incredible discovery. trees had leaves.
You write as if you can see all of the detail of everything from a very great height. You write both from inside the things that the subjects that you were talking about and also outside of time. Reading it, I had the experience that it feels very much like you were talking about in the introduction, that there are so many sections that are to me about now. There are so many parts of it where you speak about different kinds of art that feels disparate, art that feels like it comes from different worlds, as if they are happening in exactly the same time and by the same people, and yet it's also so clear on everybody's place historically, everybody's place at the time that they are writing it, and their specific histories. It really is, and the writing is so fun and filled with so much love that even when you're talking shit about people, it still feels lovely. You know what I'm saying? Like the put downs are so fun, and the really the best way to get people to hear something. And so I wanna actually stay on the subject of the now of it, but also just as a writer, at this time, were there writers that you looked up to? Did this style of yours just come from you? Is it the only way you can think of to talk about music? It's, how do you imitate anybody?
Well, this book really came out of the years I spent in American Studies at Cal as an undergraduate and then as a graduate student. I took a seminar when I was a sophomore, just I think about 12 students, maybe 15, in American Studies, and that gave me my subject. That gave me what I wanted to think about, what I wanted to talk about. That class, more than anything, made me a writer. This is an American Studies book. It came right out of that seminar room in the main library. And there were writers who I thought, if I could say a tenth as much as they say to me, and if I could write one sentence as good as their pages, that's what I'm trying to do. That was Edmund Wilson. That was D.H. Lawrence from his book Studies in Classic American Literature. That was Pauline Kael, especially Pauline Kael. And Ernest Hemingway, his short stories, I don't know why, but I would read one of those stories when my writing was getting clotted, when it was getting filled with adjectives, when I was, in a way, trying not to say anything and cover up that I no longer had anything to say. And I'd read a story from In Our Time, and I'd feel like I'd just taken a cold shower and now I could talk straight again. Yes, there were all kinds of writers. And, as time goes on, I've discovered other writers, and I, have striven to somehow reach a point where in my own mind I could feel a kinship. People like Manny Farber, Raymond Chandler, those are my touchstones.
You talk about the cultural significance of everybody hearing something on Top 40 radio together that was somehow important to each person personally, right? It also feels like in the sort of time, the very similar feeling times of the 70s, that you find a great amount of comfort and hope and resistance in the existence of popular music and popular culture and what manages to break through and how people find themselves in that. And I wonder what do we do now that there's no radio? You know, with the death of I remember that feeling too. I remember, I remember the first time I heard Gin and Juice. I remember being 9 years old and learning all the words to the Humpty Dance, Bill is here. Like I remember these things as being important, but it's been kind of a long time since that was how we discovered music, and it's also this thing of the internet that we thought was this great that was going to really democratize everything has kind of just made everything shitty in a lot of ways. Well, there's incredible access, but also all of it is gate-kept, and where algorithms are feeding us things that hits don't feel it feels like even harder than it was then for something to break through in a way that some of these songs did. And so I just wonder if you have any thoughts on the function of rock and roll and pop music as resistance or salve or inspiration in the 70s, and where you may find something similar today, and if you do.
That's a wonderful question. I could answer it for hours upon hours.
We have 20 minutes.
But I'll just say a couple of things. In a way, Top 40 radio, that was all there was. You turn on the radio, you hear the songs they're playing. Top 40. They played the same 40 songs over and over again. Usually it was really 10 or 12, and everybody heard them. I remember being in high school. Was it high school? No, it was not high school. It was grade school. And Elvis Presley's All Shook Up was on the radio, and so was Chuck Berry's School Day. Elvis was #1. Chuck Berry was #2. Everybody was talking about who was going to be #1 next week, and I went out and bought All Shook Up to keep Elvis #1. And I felt like I was voting in an election. I was so proud. And Chuck Berry won that week. But everybody could talk about that. It was lingua franca. To me, the equivalent of that today, when you have to go out and search to find out what you love, it's not going to be handed to you. And not everybody you know is going to be listening to, hearing, or reading the same books as you are. Everything is going to be, you found it. Maybe you can tell people about it. Your best friend, maybe somebody else. To me, the equivalent of Top 40 radio today, and you have to search for it, you have to go looking, is YouTube. After Renee Good and then Alex Preddy were murdered in Minneapolis, people began to make songs. And of course they were making speeches, and they were holding rallies. And all of that was on YouTube. You could watch all of that. And people were speaking out. And they were saying, this is what I think. This is how I feel. Maybe they did it in a song. Maybe they did it in a video. But they were speaking. It was a public forum. And some of those little interruptions, some of those little interventions have millions and millions of views. People are turning in because they want to see what other people have to say. There have been some things on YouTube in the last couple of weeks that have just broken me down. The passion, the imagination, the love, all about these murders. And how do you live in that world? How do you accept it? How do you fight it? How do you reject it? How do you speak its language? How do you speak your own language? That is all playing out on YouTube. Another great thing about the internet is that, and I'll never forget this, I was walking around Lake of the Isles in Minneapolis with one of my oldest friends, someone I had known since we were 7 or 8 years old. He died a number of years ago. But we were walking around, I was trying to tell him about a record that was made in New Orleans in 1927, something I write about in Mystery Train, by a man named Richard Rabbit Brown, a song called James Alley Blues. And I said to my friend, we were talking, and I said, I want to play you this record. It's the greatest record ever made. I really believe that. I've listened to it hundreds of times. You've just got to hear it. So I pulled out my phone, and I wrote in the name, and I held it up, and in 10 seconds, we were listening to that song. Now, I'm 80 years old. I wasn't born into that world. I'm so glad I'm here to see it.
I love the Sly Stone section of this book, and you talk about there's a riot going on. That's the album that mostly you're focused on in it, which is a beautiful album, and also one that comes at sort of the height of his, where he's rubbing up most against his pop success, right? And what that means to be black, what it means to be making music at that time, what it means to make people dance, what it means to be speaking about joyous things. And there's so much conflict in that record, and it occurred to me, everybody that you talk about in the book has reached such great heights that at some point they had to reckon with those things. And I think oftentimes there's a great, the project that comes out when they are struggling with that the most seems to be one that is, where there's a lot for us to hold on to, there's a lot for us to think about, and that also seems to speak most directly to the times. And it's interesting, I think growing up, my favorite Sly song was In Time, which is actually from post that record, it's from the one after it. And it made me go back and listen to Riot and fall in love with it differently, and again be struck by how resonant all of these questions are about the value of celebrity and the value of dance. Where and how do we dance in times of great cynicism? And so I wonder if you had thoughts about sort of that moment for artists, and where incredible popularity rubs up against the times that it's in, and the usefulness of that moment, or the not so usefulness of that moment, or what, again, like for me, it's so hard to, we are exposed to all of our most popular artists all the time. We don't actually learn what they think through their records anymore, right? We learn about it from the fact that they're talking to us on their social media pages. And so I think having that distance removed has sort of done something to that, finding that moment of struggle on a record. That was just something that occurred to me while I was reading.
Well, here is Sly Stone. He comes out of Vallejo. There's a very smart kid. Might have been the smartest kid at Vallejo High School. He found a teacher. Talks about this in his autobiography that came out just about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, just not long before he died. He talks about finding a teacher who showed him how to, didn't necessarily teach him about music theory, though he did. Didn't necessarily teach him about composition, though he did. He taught him how to learn, is the way Sly Stone put it. Not, he made me want to learn, he taught me how to learn. How to think, how to ask questions, how to ask people who know more than I do, how to ask myself questions. So here's someone who's put together a band. It's not like any band anyone else has put together, not like any band anyone has ever heard. There are black people, there are white people, there are men, there are women playing all different kinds of instruments. And they're making music, I want to take you higher. Dance to the music. They're making celebratory music. They're waving their arms in the air. At the same time, they're singing absolutely irresistible songs like Everyday People, different strokes for different folks. Don't call me Whitey, don't call me Whitey. All this stuff is breaking out in their records. And people are saying, yeah, we want to go higher. And they're not saying, what does everyday people mean? That we're all everyday people? What does that mean? How is that about me? Is it about me? Sly Stone puts out a record in 1971 called There's a Riot Going On, Sly and the Family Stone. It's really Sly Stone and another musician, Bobby Womack, in his studio in Los Angeles, playing all the instruments, doing almost all the vocal tracks. And Sly Stone decides to call it There's a Riot Going On. He said the reason was Marvin Gaye had put out a record a year or two before, What's Going On? An absolutely great record. As important a record in terms of the state of the nation as Bob Dylan's The Times They Are A-Changin' was in 1963. So Sly Stone, in the great tradition of rock and roll answer records, made an answer record. And his answer was, what's going on? There's a riot going on. And yet, there was no sound of a riot on this album. It was down, it was dank, it was ugly, it was slow. A lot of the songs sounded like they were made by someone who was lying in bed and trying to decide if he had the strength to get out of it, or if there was any reason to get out of it, if it was worth it. You know, you stay in this bed, and you don't have to think about anything, and no one's going to bother you, and no one's going to come knock on your door because nobody knows who you are, and people who knew you have forgotten, and you barely exist at all. And that's what this record was saying. And the last track on the record, if you read the label on the cover, if you read the information on the cover, the last track was There's a Riot Going On. And you put the record on, and you played it, and you got to the last track, and the last track was blank. Did that mean there was no riot? Did that mean that you had to make Scoop Nisker, the great FM Bay Area newsman, always used to sign off, if you don't like the news, go out and make some of your own. Is that what Sly Stone was saying? It's your turn. You write the last track on this album. You sing it. I couldn't imagine listening to that record anything more ambitious, anything more, in some ways, beautiful. And it was getting horrible reviews. People were stomping on this record. They were saying, Sly Stone, take us higher. Don't bring us down. And he was saying, you know, my job is to tell the truth, and this is the truth. To have stuff like that to work with, that's why I wrote this book. I thought there's a story here. There's a history here. This is a portrait of the Republic. Where did that come from? What does it look like? Who lives in it? The music that I was lucky to write about, all of it, was that expansive, had that much room in it. Sly Stone, you know, this edition of this book is kind of a miracle. I don't mean because I wrote it and it's so brilliant. Sly Stone died in July of last year. I think it was July, maybe the 7th, maybe the 8th. Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys died the same day. The chapter I probably am most proud of in this book is about the 1930s blues singer Robert Johnson, who was killed in 1938. His stepsister, Annie Andrews, stepped out just a few years ago with a book called Brother Robert, about growing up with Robert Johnson in the 1930s when she was 10, 12 years old. Absolutely extraordinary book, putting you in the life of a person who, when I wrote this book, nobody knew anything about him. Nobody knew when he was born. Nobody knew exactly when he died. There was no known picture of him. Nobody knew what he really looked like. What a great thrill to be able to write a book called Mystery Train and write about a mystery as if you could answer the real questions which were in the music. Annie Anderson died that same week at 99 years old. And I was able to get all that into the book a week before it arrived in the mail and I could hold it in my hands. I mean, there are some things about the modern world that are pretty great. That you can be making changes in a book a week before it's published. I don't know how that happens. You know, to be able, what this book is, this book is, when it was originally published, this is what it looked like when it was originally published. This is what it looks like now. It was about 200 pages. Now it's over 500 pages. Because I haven't changed anything in the text of the book as I wrote it then. But there was a little section in the back of this first edition called Notes and Discographies, where I filled in gaps with just information and played around with it too. And that was about 30 pages, and now it's 350 pages or something like that. And I get to keep following these stories, and these stories don't die. That's what's so shocking. Sly Stone has died, and yet people are arguing about him in some ways more than they have in 40 years. Elvis Presley died in 1977. I can't tell you the people who have called me and written me and told me about seeing the new Elvis movie that came out 2 weeks ago, Epic, Elvis Presley in Concert by Baz Luhrmann, following his great Elvis movie of a few years ago. I can't tell you the way people have talked about this movie, Elvis fans, not Elvis fans, saying they've seen things they've never seen before, and they don't mean they saw Elvis, sing a song they never heard him sing before. They mean they saw possibilities in art, in performance, in film that they never saw before. And I've been able to try and follow all of that year by year, edition after edition. And it was very daunting to think, when this book came out, I had just turned 80. I thought, I'm not going to get another chance. But everything had to go into it. If I do another edition, you'll be in here somewhere.
I have so many more things I want to ask you, but we're gonna go out to dinner. So, if I know we wanted to open up at least some time for you guys to have questions. I will say, another thing that your book does is the Elvis section is mind blowing for a person who does not care about Elvis, who thought I didn't care about Elvis, and a big part of it that is really so incredible to me was the idea of somebody becoming greater than anything they should have been able to become, and being ready for that moment, and then being able to live inside of it with like full awareness. The way you talk about Elvis in there is so incredible. It's so fat, it made me have a brand new appreciation for him. And so the thing that's happening with Baz Luhrmann's movie also happens with people who read this book for the first time. And also you are giving us context for things that have been around our whole lives. Elvis is rock and roll, you say it, but I grew up with it, and I didn't appreciate it nearly as much until a week ago,
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to jump to a Q&A, and then we're going to have these wonderful folks signing books at the back after the Q&A. If you have a question, just raise your hand, and a mic will find you.
Hey, so I have a question. Like, what role would you say your hometown kind of plays in with your creative process? Whether it's you said being in Berkeley and writing a lot of what you wrote at UC Berkeley, or being from Oakland and then coming back and having almost that kind of overwhelming experience of like, oh, these are all people that I know that are at the show that I'm playing at. Like, what is that role of, like, maybe going to Memphis and finding all this information, going to Broadway, and then coming back home, and what role does that have in your creativity?
That's funny you say going to Memphis. I wrote this book in a little room in Berkeley. I didn't go anywhere. I just played records and thought. And, that's a good way to write a book. I did another book that was all about research and traveling everywhere and knocking on doors and trying to find books that no one had looked at for 50 years. That was a different kind of book. But, what role does my hometown play in it? Everything. If I hadn't gone to Cal, I'd have nothing to say. That's really true. But if I hadn't gone to Menlo Atherton High School when I did, from 1959 to 1963, I wouldn't have the frame of reference that I've carried with me ever since. I've just been lucky. It's a good place to grow up.
Yeah, I agree. I remember I went away to college, and I accidentally majored in theater, and I learned a whole bunch of shit, and it all seemed like very useless to me. And I came back, and one of the first plays I did was with Margot Hall, who, like, Bay Area legend, who actually taught me everything I know. But I just watched her work, and all of a sudden, all of the theory I had been reading made a whole bunch of sense, because I didn't understand at the time that you can just only use the parts that work for you. You know, that you get to choose these things. And that spirit of learning a lot about a lot and then letting your process be messy is a very Bay Area thing. And that way of working is something all the way that I work is always, it's all stuff I learned here. It's my friend Wildman making me do 200 takes of a song because he wouldn't let me punch in to a thing. So like the reason I can rap really fast is because I had to do it 200 times and come back week after week because he wouldn't let me not do it that way, which is a stupid way to record. We don't do that anymore, but at the time, he was like, you're going to have to do this live, and also, I don't really know how to do that thing with the computer. So, all of that, both the technique and the appreciation for art making and the way of going about it, to me, feels like it is inseparable from my upbringing here.
Hi. Thank you both for the really great conversation. I wanted to ask about, you talked a little bit about, what internet has done for the world of music and the pros and cons. I wanted to ask about how you feel, I guess, the internet in the modern age, what it's done for music journalism. There's now a world where more people can write and make their ideas known kind of more easily than ever before. At the same time, being a professional music journalist is more financially precarious than maybe at any other point in history. And as someone who came up and built his career as a music journalist in a very different point in that sort of like industry's history, how do you feel about where music journalism is today?
The first piece I ever published was a record review in Rolling Stone in 1968. They had a little ad saying, if you have something you want to say, send it in, maybe we'll print it. So I went to a record store on Telegraph Avenue. I bought a new album by The Who, my favorite band at that point in 1968. It was called The Who on Tour. And all Who fans wanted a live album. Obviously, this was a live album. So I bought it and took it home, and it was a bunch of B-sides and tracks that weren't good enough to be put on albums. It wasn't a live album. I'd lost $2.98. I'd been cheated. So I wrote an angry little review about what this record could have been, and I mailed it in. And in the next issue, when I went to buy the next issue of Rolling Stone, there it was. And a week later, I got a check in the mail for $12.50. And I said, this is easy. I should do this again. That's how I started writing, for a little publication that people hadn't heard of coming out of San Francisco. Today, I write on Substack. Not a big difference. A lot of things happened in between. Substack is YouTube for writers. And there are just more voices speaking now than there ever have been before. Does anybody hear them? You can't be sure. You got to go look for your audience, and audience has to look for you.
Hi. I read Mystery Train in '86 for the first time. Loved the book. It set me on a path. I'd like to take the conversation, ask you to take the conversation forward. I'm curious. I'm always interested in like which new people, but I'd really like to know what you think of Taylor Swift. Where does she fit in this conversation about Americana and American history and music and top 40? Where would you put her? What do you think about her?
I have to ask my granddaughters. I have a video on my phone of my granddaughters at Taylor Swift's show in Chicago a couple of years ago, and singing every word, and the joy on their faces, the delirious joy. I can't believe I'm in the same room. That anybody can make a life out of giving that thrill to people. I think what Taylor Swift, like so many other people, ultimately is saying to people, what do you love? I know you're going to say you love me, but in the world, about yourself, when you look around, what attracts you? Because that's what I'm singing about. I put Taylor Swift as, not someone I want to listen to, although All Too Well is just a tour de force. You could watch that over and over again, that 10-minute video. That 10-minute performance on Saturday Night Live was just shocking. I want that kind of depth. I want that kind of reach and ambition. Taylor Swift is letting people, is leading people, is what I mean to say, into asking what it is they want. And that's a great thing. That's a great political act.
Certainly have enjoyed hearing both of you tonight. If this book is, as you say, a reflection of how music reflects the culture it comes out of, and how the culture reflects the music that's going on at the time, what do you think is going to happen going forward in terms of Spotify and the fact that now AI can generate music? How is that going to change, or will it change, the relationship between culture and the artist?
There's enough that keeps me up at night. And that is something I try very hard not to think about, because I don't need something else to keep me up at night.
As someone who has thought about it quite a bit, and in clipping we've done some very fun experiments with some of the AI tools. What it makes me think is that now more than ever, like the creative center of the thing is what matters. The idea is what matters, right? We're sort of democratizing things like technique, or needing to understand music, or needing to have practiced an instrument, or all of that. But hip-hop was birthed out of that too, right? It was birthed out of like not having music lessons in school anymore, and being able to steal your parents' record collection and learning how to manipulate technology at the time, right? Technological advances have always led to sort of big jumps in form for music. And also it's always connected with figuring out how to reference something that has already existed, which is all that AI is capable of doing, right? So the thing that makes me still able to sleep at night is that it's still just a tool. Even as it becomes more sentient, I don't know, I don't like something because it comes from somebody who's sentient, right? Like, it's the idea, it's the soul behind it, and that I think is just going to continue to become more important and more necessary. But again, like, we're going to have to find it. It's not, we don't know what's going to be fed to us, and so yeah, it's tricky, and it is in some ways scary to think about, but also I don't know. I also find a lot of solace in the fact that it's like not my job to figure it out, right? I don't know. I talk to kids nowadays, and I'm like, oh man, that is stressful. Like I'm like done being cool, right? I'm past it, which thank God, to not have that weight on your shoulders anymore, to have to like decide what culture is. That is for somebody younger than me, which is awesome.
Last question. Oh, I hope I can live up to that. So I really appreciate being in the room with both of you. I have a lot of respect for you. And I want to know, I would love to know how the two of you link together. And also, I'm very much interested in, David, what your next step is. We've followed you for a long time, and we would love to know what you're up to.
You said something about how the two of us, and I
Yes,
didn't hear the rest.
it seems like, the conversation between the two of you is really very important. How did that come together? Why you love each other, or why you respect each other? And then, David, what are you up to?
We've been lucky to know each other, and I think we respect each other's work and thought we'd have something to talk about. And I hope we did.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to the book festival for making this possible. It's a great privilege, and I wish we could go on for another hour. I love this, but they're going to kick us out. So thank you all for coming.
thank you guys.